Welcome to the AM Update, Week in Review. A collection of the best moments from Aaron McIntire's morning update.
Boy, howdy. If you were on the right this weekend and you just had kind of the agnostic take on tariffs, according to some people, you were the enemy. It's not enough to be agnostic when it comes to tariffs. You must be actively anti-tariff, I was told, or at least suggested. I saw a lot of really emotionally, let's just say, suspect takes on the tariff debate over the weekend. And I noticed that most of those emotionally untethered, emotionally unhinged takes seem to come from one side of the debate. But I think, however, after thinking about this a little bit more, I think what explains all of the apoplexy and all of the hysteria from the right, I don't care about the left. Don't care about them. I mean, Donald Trump could cure cancer. He could send everyone to Mars. He could perform miracles, and the left would still call him literally Hitler and probably Satan. Okay, so I don't care about the left. What I'm more interested is in the right. And I think what explains a lot of the hysteria you saw, even from Trump supporters on the right, boils down to really two factors. Number one, nobody knows really for certain what the end game is here. I want to get to that in a little bit, but nobody knows for certain what the end game is here. Is this permanent tariffs to raise revenue? Are these tariffs a bargaining chip for better trade deals and reshoring some industries? Is this all an elaborate ploy to isolate China? Or a combination of all three of those things? We don't know for sure, and there's a reason for that, I think. It's just my opinion. It might not be fact. But I think there's a reason for that, and I'll get to that, like I said, in a little bit. So that's one factor. Nobody knows for sure what the end game is here. Number two, I think this apoplexy is coming also from free trade absolutists who see tariffs as blasphemy. So I can understand if you think these tariffs are permanent, which we don't know if they're permanent or not. I don't know that, and I don't think anybody does for sure. If you're a free trade absolutist and you think these tariffs are permanent policy across the board, I can understand why you are apoplectic right now, with no patience for people like me who are in kind of the wait and see camp. So, nobody knows for certain what the end game is here, and I think free trade absolutists see these tariffs as permanent policy, and that's why they're really upset, and I understand that. However, I think this entire thing is just a broad negotiation, art of the deal. So I would not expect, and neither should you, for the White House and Donald Trump to reveal their hand. Of course, if it is a broad negotiation, of course you're going to tell all of these countries, no, this is permanent policy of the United States going forward. That's your leverage play. That gets them to the table begging for deals, begging for better terms on trade deals. I think that's what's happening right now. But there was a lot of certainty posited from people who are, I think, probably fall into the second camp, free trade absolutists. A lot of certainty about what Trump is doing, what he's trying to accomplish, when I really don't think anybody knows for sure, including maybe the White House itself. They're kind of watching to see this play out, and then they'll make a move when they see, hey, this is the best possible outcome to this entire ordeal. So they might not even know. I think their ultimate goal probably isolating China, but will they be able to achieve that this go round? I'm not sure. Maybe. They might be able to. Everybody just needs to take a deep breath. I understand if you're close to retirement, seeing the stock market crash and crash as hard as it did on Thursday and Friday, even though it's back to the levels that it was at this time last year, and we'll see what it does today. I can see why you would be really perturbed by this. Okay, so you are in your late 50s, mid 60s, and you're just getting ready to retire, and the stock market crashes, and your 401k, Roth IRAs, whatever your retirement accounts. I can understand why you're really concerned about that. I think that's maybe a third group of people as well that explains this hysteria on the right. I hope if you are in that camp, you also understand my camp as well, and people who are even younger than me. I'll just be completely honest with you. I had no retirement at all before a few weeks ago. No retirement fund at all. Now I'm starting to put a little bit into it. So I had no retirement. So I'm not as invested as you are. So I don't have your perspective. But I also think you need to understand my perspective as well. and people who are probably young Gen X and younger. We're going to be paying into Social Security our entire lives and probably not going to get anything back from that. So whatever needs to be done to ensure that there are opportunities for people like us in the future, I hope you'll at least understand, maybe not agree, but I hope you'll understand where some of us are coming from with these, at least, moves to ensure the American economy can thrive in the future. I think that's the motivation here. So I just think there needs to be a lot more grace, a lot more seeking to understand where people are coming from, because I tried to extend that over the weekend, multiple occasions. I mean, I made a joke that was aimed really at a very specific group of people about how, are the tariffs in the room with you right now? And that blew up. People taking that completely out of, people who I like and respect, intentionally taking that out of context, even after I explained what the motivation was for that. I mean, there's just, this is a coalition government right now. And if you're tearing each other apart over minutia and not seeking to really understand where everybody's coming from, that's going to blow up really, really fast.
You're listening to the AM Update, Week in Review. Follow on X and Instagram at Real AM Update.
This is billionaire Democrat donor Antonio Gracias. He's now working for the Department of Government Efficiency. He told the All In podcast the Biden administration's border policies handed human traffickers how much money?
But you got to realize we gave $13 to $15 billion a year to human traffickers.
$13 to $15 billion a year to human traffickers. He goes on.
That's what the system did. And the money magnet that attracted these people here, it wasn't like it was some crisis that, environmental crisis. The money magnet attracted these people, and many of them died on the way up. I mean, think about what that's like. Think about the human crisis. So this is a human
suffering, a human rights tragedy. You have people who are getting sold into slavery and being abused at the border. At a minimum, every American should be against that.
Everyone is. Every American is. Look, man, this turned my stomach. When I went to the border and I heard the stories, it turned my stomach, man. We are America, okay? We protect people like this. We don't give incentives to people to pay traffickers. If you pay $20,000, I heard $20,000 to $500 just across the border, $20,000. I mean, where does someone who's coming from Central America or Africa get $20,000 to pay the traffickers that are walking them across the border? It's not free to walk up Mexico, okay? It's controlled by the cartels. What happens? I mean, they got to pay that back. How do they pay it back? They're basically indentured servants. This is terrible. This isn't what we do in this country, right? This country is about freedom, and we are here to protect it. We protect it around the world. We protect it in our home country. And I don't think any American that I know, none of them, Democrats, Republicans, or anyone, thinks this is good. It's not good. It's bad for America, and it's evil behavior. We should incent it. We shouldn't give people a reason to do it. We should find legal ways to come in the country. And Antonio, I think that's the way to come together.
That is Antonio Gracias, a Democrat mega donor who is a billionaire, now working with the Department of Government Efficiency, absolutely incensed after finding through his work at Doge, that the Biden administration was sending $13 to $15 billion a year to human traffickers. This is a Democrat saying this. Absolutely incensed that the Biden administration was explicitly incentivizing the border crisis for the stated purpose, in his opinion, of increasing Democrats on the voter rolls. He also said, going on in that interview, there is evidence that several thousands of these illegal aliens who were incentivized via money to come into this country by the cartels and human traffickers, there's evidence that they've already voted. Again, this is a Democrat saying this. That was a mess. Still is a mess that Trump is cleaning up really quickly if you look at the numbers at the border now. But never forget what the Biden administration, the Biden regime tried to do to this country. What you're about to hear is a conversation that the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors for President Trump, and that would be Stephen Miron, conversation that he had with Hudson Institute senior fellow Thomas Duestenberg. This was a talk given earlier this week before President Trump kind of gave a 90-day pause to all of these other countries, the 75-plus countries. Now, Stephen Miran, he's an economist. He's also the author of an essay titled A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System. This was published back in the aftermath of the election back in November of 2024. I read it for the first time back in early February and revisited it again this week. And I tried to track down Stephen Miran to see what he was saying now versus what he said in this essay back in November to see if he try to figure out if he's happy with how things are going, if he's not really happy. I listened to this entire conversation and talk that he gave at the Hudson Institute earlier this week. He plays it pretty even-keeled. I think there's, under the surface, maybe a little bit frustration with how this was rolled out, but overall, he seems to be pretty forthright and pretty steadfast in how things are playing out, because he's echoing the president. Maybe the president is echoing him. What we are doing now with global trade is not sustainable. We got to the part of the conversation where they talked about China, and I think this is crucial to understanding what is actually happening with tariffs, China, and global trade. Listen to this.
Okay, I want to change gears slightly here and focus a little bit more on China. You mentioned in your opening remarks that classical economic theory would suggest that trade deficits are self-adjusting in terms of movements in the currencies.
It assumes them away. Classic economic theory just assumes away, they call it a transversality condition, but really what they do is they assume away the problem.
Well, we know it didn't work. So, and part of the reason it hasn't worked in reality is because mercantilist countries like China, which break almost every rule in the economic playbook of free markets, subsidization, theft of intellectual property, overproduction, closing off their own market. Many analysts have argued that China's weak economy in recent years is only held up by overinvestment in production capacity and the exports which result from the goods production from their overinvestment. This has been seen again and again in industries like steel, solar panels, critical minerals, electric vehicles, among others. And they depend on their access to foreign markets of advanced economies like ours, which are more consumption-oriented. But the question is, if China has a weak and weakening economy and it's dependent on exports, the tariff policy that the administration has adopted and the first Trump administration adopted should be especially effective against China. So my question is your analysis of where the Chinese economy is headed agree with the idea that they're really weakening and they are especially vulnerable to the actions that your administration is taking in the area of tariffs and closing off some access to our markets?
I do think they're vulnerable to experiencing significant economic stress as a result of the historically bold action that the president has taken. And they have limited capacity to absorb that pain. What you see from China is they tend to alternate between different drivers of their growth engine based on what they feel they can stomach at any moment. And they tend to have these top-down GDP targets, and then, okay, what can we do to achieve that GDP target? And one moment it's exporting to America, the next moment it's inflate a housing bubble, then it's exporting to others, other countries, and so for the last year or so they've been in a bit of this last mode where they've been trying to export their extra capacity around the world, and so but at the end of the day, there's no substitute for American demand. And so I don't know that they'll be so successful at trying to find an alternative. And this is part of why the United States has leverage and other countries don't. Can we talk about incidents? Are you going to ask me or? Can I bring it up now?
Sure.
Okay, so I think that the incidence of tariffs is one of the most important. So economists use the word incidence to sort of refer to who bears the cost or benefit of any economic policy, whether it's a tariff, a subsidy, a tax, a regulation, whatever it is. Who actually experiences the consequence? And one of the core results in economics is that the person who bears the economic cost or benefit isn't really a function of who actually has to remit the payment to the government. It's a function of the relative elasticities, which basically is easier to think of as who's more flexible and who's inflexible. And the example that I like to use with people is about property taxes, because I feel like this is something that most people can relate to. And just imagine that you're buying a house and suddenly the town that you're looking to buy a house in says, okay, we're raising property taxes by 300%. And your property tax bill isn't going to be $10,000 a year, it's going to be $30,000 a year. That's a big jump, right? And so if you're very flexible, an economist would say elastic, if you're very flexible, you might decide, hey, I'm going to look at the next town over instead because, I could just live 3 miles down the road and have, be, just in similar community and it would be fine. You can move your demand across a border. The person who's selling the house can't move his house across the border. The house is stuck in that town, right? So because you are flexible, you can adjust your behavior to avoid the burden of the tax. The person selling the house can't adjust his behavior. He's stuck, the house is stuck where the house is stuck. So he has to drop his selling price because demand for that house disappeared. Right? And so that lower selling price is now it clears the market. Economists would say the incidence of the property tax fell on the owner of the home, not the buyer of the home. The buyer of the home changed his behavior to avoid the tax. The seller of the home was unable to change his behavior to avoid the tax. Right? Now, when you think about this with tariffs, you say, okay, who's flexible and who's inflexible? We can reallocate our demand across borders. Factories that are already built cannot move. They are stuck where they are. China has developed factories for selling to the US consumer market. They have trained workers for selling to the US consumer market. We can move our demand across borders. Those factories and citizens cannot move. They're stuck where they are. And so the incidence will fall on them, just as in the property tax example, right? Now, does this automatically happen on day one? No. But will this happen in the fullness of time? Absolutely. This is just the basic economics of incidence in public finance. And if the incidence is falling on other countries because they're inflexible, the Chinese now have to find someplace else to absorb their demand, to absorb their excess supply. And guess what? There isn't anywhere else to absorb their excess supply. Who's going to buy as much as American consumers? Nobody, right? There is no place else to absorb their excess supply. They are inflexibly supplying to the world market. And that inflexibility, as economists would say, inelasticity, means that they bear the burden, they bear the incidence of the tariffs. And that is why the tariffs represent revenue to the United States Treasury that is financed by the countries that we are tariffing.
Isn't that fascinating? Not totally sure I agree with all of that, but it is at least an intriguing and interesting way of trying to solve the China problem. I was chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors for President Trump, Stephen Miron, speaking this week at the Hudson Institute, talking about how because China's entire manufacturing base is 100%, or at least 99%, geared towards the American market and the American consumer, and there's no substitute for American demand, that makes them very inflexible. They can't sell their excess goods into Europe or India or these emerging markets at this moment. So much like property taxes, if they were jacked up on your home by 300%, you can't just get out of your house. You have to bear the burden of that house. What he's articulating there flies in the face of every assumption that's been made throughout history, at least modern history, about tariffs. Stephen Miron, chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, with some interesting outlooks and assumptions there about tariffs.
You're listening to the AM Update, Week in Review. Follow on X and Instagram at RealAMUpdate.
And finally, we have our poll of the week. I asked you, what do you think the final outcome of President Trump's trade program will end up being? I gave you 4 options. As always, other comment below. Other options: trust the plan, depression, or China goes kinetic. Kinetic can mean a lot of different ways. Usually it's meant in warfare, but who knows? They do like to go viral as well, as some pointed out. Here are the results. Other comment below, 8.2%. China goes kinetic in third place at 7.2%. A Great Depression at 11.5%. And number one with the bullet, trust the plan at 73.1%. Let's go to what you said. G. Harmon says, if it is all negotiation, it might work. If it is tariffs forever, jacking up taxes way up on voters doesn't work. Correct. If it's high tariffs forever, and we don't get rid or at least fundamentally transform the income tax, that's going to be ruinous to 90% of the country. Now, that's not what the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors thinks, Stephen Miran. He thinks we can do about I think I've read elsewhere, he said about a 17 or 20% effective tariff rate. And I believe what I read is that he thinks that's on China. Maybe that's the rest of the world. Stephen Miran thinks that we've got tariffs all wrong. And in this environment, because of what China has done and what other countries have done, they're not really truly operating in a free market way. He says tariffs are therefore misunderstood, at least their impacts on the average consumer. So these have to be a bargaining chip. Now, targeted tariffs, you can make them work. You know, there's a video going viral this week. President Reagan, back in the 80s, dissing the concept of tariffs. Well, Ronald Reagan in 1987 applied a 100% tariff on Japanese electronics. Now, the tariff went away later that year, but it's not as if the Gipper was completely and utterly against using tariffs in a prudent way. So there's that. Trevor says, I have no clue. I figure it'll mostly play out to Trump's plans with a few snafus. Steven says it's a nothing burger. Don't know what that means. It was not a nothing burger this week. If you follow the markets, you're close to retirement and you have money tied up in the stock market, that was not a nothing burger. So I'm not really sure what you're saying there. Regular Dirk says, still wait and find out. Bruce Jenner's uterus says, I chose trust the plan, but that is a Q thing, and I'm apprehensive affirming any of their catchphrases. I know this wasn't your intention, Aaron. Thank you, Bruce Jenner's uterus. Thank you for giving me the benefit of the doubt. You are probably the first person on social media out of hundreds in the past week to give me the benefit of the doubt. So I appreciate that, Bruce Jenner's uterus. I still really don't fully understand what Q is, but I'll take your word for it. Gary Rasmussen Jr. says, other countries realize only thing we have to offer is worthless green paper, and we lose reserve currency, then it's game on. That is a pretty real possibility. You know, being the world's reserve currency has some benefits. It also has some drawbacks as well. Being the world's reserve currency means we can borrow money at a much cheaper rate, but it also means the dollar is very strong because it's in demand, high demand, which hurts our export ability. That's one of the things Stephen Miran has talked about kind of down the road once tariff policy has been enacted, is making sure we're taking care of our currency. But it is worth it for the United States, I think long term, obviously, to remain the world's reserve currency if it's possible. Tom Bazika says, not sure where this plan leads, but I think there is a plan in this particular case. I'm glad I'm glad Congress can't get in the way of the plan, whatever it is. Jeff says too much infighting will derail any real plan, and result in more uncertainty. We did see some infighting this week, primarily between Peter Navarro and Elon Musk. Now, Peter Navarro went to prison, I think, for a little while for Donald Trump during the first administration, but I'll tell you, he came off as entirely unhinged over the past week. Now, I don't know if this is part of the good cop, bad cop routine, but I do know Peter Navarro, at least at one point in his life, and people change, but he ran as a degrowth Democrat. A degrowth. That's a term I haven't heard for a long time, but it's exactly what it implies. Against growth. In fact, shrinkage. Jay Breezy says, I don't even want to attempt to guess. I can see it both going good and bad. Craig says, I trust the plan, but voted other. Without a drastic repeal of regulations on manufacturing, energy, and transportation, it's hard to see how they work. He hasn't talked about that side of the equation at all. Well, I think just this week, in fact, yesterday, and this would have been after you submitted this, Craig, I think yesterday I saw that he signed some executive order on deregulation, because that absolutely is a crucial part of this. Deregulation and lowering taxes. Ease the pressure on business creators and entrepreneurs to get started. I think the Environmental Protection Agency under Lee Zeldin, I've seen they're trying to make as many cuts to regulations as possible. That was announced a few weeks ago, too. Jim says it could go either way. Probably worth a shot. Jim Skinner. I knew a Jim Skinner growing up. I don't know if this is the same Jim Skinner. Rhino Hunter says 15 days to slow the spread. John Galt says, I'm not sure if it'll work, but doing what's tried doesn't. Willing to let it play out. Some Call Me Tim says, gotta cause China to cave. Michael says, same as it ever was. Jim says most countries will agree to some sort of zero deficit trade agreement with the exception of China, which will threaten to cut off our supply of critical goods. Uniparty hacks will sue Trump, and SCOTUS ultimately rules against his tariffs 7-2. See, this is the one thing, I should say, maybe not the one thing, but one thing that has concerned me, because it's been over a week now, and we haven't gotten any sort of judicial tyranny on the tariffs. See what I'm saying? On basically every good policy that Trump has tried to enact unilaterally via executive actions, the judiciary has tried to get in the way and gum things up. On this, though, they have not, so far.
You're listening to the AM Update, Week in Review. Follow on X and Instagram at @RealAMUpdate.
I'm thinking about running for president. Running for president in 2028. In case things don't work out with J.D. Vance, or Ron DeSantis, or Marco Rubio, or anybody else who wants to run for president. And I'm running on a very populist agenda. I have a three-legged stool of my presidential platform. A three-legged stool. Here's the first leg. Let me know what you think. Number 1, I'm running on deporting the pre-diabetic Costco family to Siberia. For the good of the country, these people need to go. They have to go. Who's the pre-diabetic Costco family? I think it's like the Rizzler or Big AJ and Little Justice. The friend, I think the friend is the Rizzler or something, but they're just pre-diabetic and they just go around talking about the doom. It's just very odd. And then they eat the most rich and sugary things they can find at Costco and they video themselves. It's just very, very attention-seeking. And I'm just viscerally opposed to attention-seeking individuals. And so they can get all the attention they want in Siberia. So I'm deporting them to Siberia. The second part of my three-legged party platform or presidential platform, I'm going to throw that blaspheming Colts fan in prison. You know the guy that I'm talking about. It's this guy who went viral this last football season.
Woo! This is our Colts. This is our team. We bleed blue.
Yeah, this guy took a worship song, and actually one of the better worship songs out there these days, and turned it into a stupid little song about the Indianapolis Colts. He's going in prison. So that is number 2 of my three-legged presidential platform. And then number 3, corporal punishment for those who do not accelerate while getting on freeway on-ramps and try to get onto the highway or interstates going 30 miles per hour. Corporal punishment for them. And maybe corporal punishment for those who don't know how four-way stop signs work. So that is my three-legged presidential platform. Do you think I can have success with this? Deport the pre-diabetic Costco family to Siberia, imprison the blaspheming Colts fan, and corporal punishment for bad drivers. Let me know. Back at it again tomorrow.
This has been the AM Update Week in Review. The AM Update will be back on Monday and every weekday at 4 a.m. Eastern Time.